Hey guys, welcome back to another video of our Paper 2 series. And today in this video, we're going to be going over how to structure your entire Paper 2. And this will be the last lesson that I give you before we look at the examples of different prompts and also different ways of structuring your essay. So make sure you pay attention. In the table of contents, we'll go through it by section of the essay. So we'll start with an introduction, and then I'll also introduce you guys to the different ways that you can structure your body paragraph. And last but not least, we'll go over what to include in the conclusion. So starting off with the introduction, it's important that you actually demonstrate your understanding of the prompt, right? So we have a whole video of how to unpack different types of prompts. And once you have chosen a prompt that you really feel confident answering, now you want to actually demonstrate that from the introduction of your writing, right? And you also want to make sure that it outlines your comparative approach. So especially in the thesis statement and also when you're introducing the two texts separately, you do want to make sure that you are telling the readers of your essay that there is a clear comparison point, and also within those comparison points that there are differences that exist between the two texts. And so all the examples of the writings of different sections of this essay that I'll be giving you guys will be based on this one prompt that says, how do the two works you have studied show that good can come out of destruction or violence? Okay, so in order to tell whether this applies for you or not, there first has to be some form of destruction or violence that's evident in the two texts that you have studied, right? If there is no destruction or violence, you can't pick this text at all, or this prompt at all. And once you've established that and you're like, okay, yes, my two texts do talk about these, it also has to be the fact that there's some kind of good that comes out of it. Okay, if there is no good that comes out of it, you also cannot explore this prompt really thoroughly. And so in the next slides, I'm going to be telling you the 5-step guides on how to actually write this. First, we want to contextualize the prompt, and this will serve as your hook sentence, okay? And you might be like, wait, for other types of essays, I thought hook was kind of optional. Do I really need to have this? Again, for the paper 2, yes, it is quite optional. There are, still good scoring essays that just start with these two texts I'm going to be talking about. Text A is about this, text B is about this, and there is really no such thing as contextualizing the prompt. But from the get-go, you want your markers of your essay to understand what prompt you'll be delving into, okay? So here in the contextualization of the prompt, you don't want to talk about the specifics, so there's no need for you to go into the specifics of the two texts. Instead, if it's a prompt that we just talked about, you could have your hook sentence be something like this, where it says, destruction and violence have long been integral to storytelling, not merely as forces of devastation, but actually as catalysts for transformation, revealing the resilience of the human spirit. So broadly speaking, this sentence almost sounds like a global issue, right? Especially if we're working with a very philosophical question about destruction, violence, goodness that comes out of it, virtue. You do want it to be very applicable to just humanity, our life, right? And so we're saying, well, to humans, these types of destruction and violence, yeah, they're sad, and it's gonna cause pain to protagonists and characters in the stories. But we're also saying, well, this is actually offering a good opportunity for characters to transform. And of course, if you're going to write this, the two texts that you'll be talking about have to actually, relate to this idea. Okay, so don't forget about that. When we introduce the text, which will come as the second sentence of your introduction, here is the part where you want to mention the full titles and authors, and basically just give out the phrasing from the prompt to ensure that you're making sure that the two texts have relevance to the prompt. So for this example, I'm going to be using Henrik Ibsen's A Doll's House and The Things They Carried by O'Brien. And you always want some kind of signposting. So as you can tell here, right, I said in both A Doll's House by Henrik Ibsen and The Things They Carried by Tim O'Brien, the resolution of conflict and the resulting character development suggests that good can emerge from destruction, ultimately offering readers a sense of resilience and renewal. So this is where it kind of goes back to the initial contextualization. right? In the hook, we talked about how there's some kind of hint to this idea of resilience, and also two key words from the prompt, good and destruction. Also, there's nothing so specific about the two texts. I'm just saying that in both works, this is a similarity, the resolution of the conflict and the resulting character development, okay? Next, you want to summarize each text in 1 to 2 sentences. So before you actually move on to the body paragraph or your thesis statement, you want to ensure that you're giving some kind of context of the individual text. You do want to do this separately, obviously, so you don't want to group them together and always talk about the similarities. Also, with the introduction, you want to make sure that it's linked to the prompt of focus. So yes, I know some people prefer memorizing a short summary of the two texts. Although it's okay for you to do that, a stronger summary would be something that links directly to the prompt. And so a focused summary example is like the following, where it says, A Doll's House, a realist play written in 1879, unravels the story of a woman named Nora confined by the traditional 19th century Victorian gender norms. Okay, so we're saying, okay, this is the protagonist, this is the text type, this is when it was published, this is the setting, right? Although her trust and love for her husband, Torvald Helmer, eventually shattered, Nora seeks a new beginning for herself and realizes the immeasurable value of self-love and independence. So the destruction, I'm saying that trust and love for her husband shatters, destruction, right? But then what is the good? The good is that she's able to seek a new beginning and realize the value of self-love and independence, right? That's the good that ensues. And then also, signposting, once again, when we transition between texts. So this is something that you always need when you're transitioning between two texts, regardless of whether it's between paragraphs or within a paragraph. So here, even though it's within a paragraph, we want to start off by saying, contrastingly, the war novel. So we're saying it's different because it's not a realist play anymore. It's instead a war novel. The Things They Carried, published in 1990, reveals the lasting physical and psychological trauma of war veterans. So the trauma is the destruction, right? Violence. Through this destruction, the protagonist O'Brien comes to learn the importance of human connection and communication as a way to cope with trauma and guilt, right? So the protagonist is able to learn their coping mechanism. And that's the good that comes out of this, okay? Then what's a more generic summary? Just because it's like more concise doesn't mean that it's more compact. At the same time, length doesn't really matter, right? You could write a generic summary that's longer than this focus summary. So we'll quickly read what says here. A Doll's House, written in 1879, explores the life of Nora, a woman who forged her father's signature to save her husband, Torvald Helmer. As she navigates her role within a traditional society, the play examines her personal struggles, relationships, and choices. Not bad, right? Not saying that this summary is wrong, because it's definitely a good summary of the text. It's just not a good summary in relation to the prompt, because I'm not really sure where the destruction happens and what the good thing is, because we only mentioned that she navigates her role in a traditional society. So how does she actually navigate that, right? Does she successfully navigate that, or does she actually fail in doing so? Again, same signposting, contrastingly, The Things They Carried, published in 1990, portrays the lives of soldiers during the Vietnam War. The novel focuses on the experiences of multiple characters as they cope with various physical, emotional, and psychological burdens. Okay, so for this one, right, the destruction is, I get it, right? There is some kind of psychological, emotional, and physical burden, but where's the good, right? Exactly how do they cope? Do they even cope, right? So the question is kind of there, and we're not really sure whether these two are the best and the most appropriate text to use for this prompt. Also, if possible, I always want you to write down the specific type of text. So if it's a play, make sure it's a play. Make sure you state it's a play. If it's a poem, make sure you state that it's a poem. If it's fictional and the other is non-fictional, then mention that. Is it semi-autobiographical or is it like an autobiography? Also mention that as well. And so that's what you don't want to do, right? The generic summary is something that you don't want to do. And the focus summary, right, is something that you want to actually utilize in your own writing as well. And after that, this is the most important stating your thesis part of the introduction. We can't move on to the body paragraph before we have this. So here, we want to answer the prompt in a single focused sentence, right? Writing a strong thesis means that you're packing everything into one sentence as much as possible. This is where it gets a little complicated though. The thesis statement for a paper 2 is not as clear cut. And the reason is because there are multiple sort of different preferences that people have. So the first preference is that we only give out a comparison point. So comparison meaning like similarities, right? Some people prefer comparison and contrast. Okay, so in one sentence or in two sentences, some teachers prefer that you talk about what's similar but also what's different, giving me that half and half. Ideally, this is the best thing to do, but if you have a lot of comparison points to begin with, let's say we have 3 comparison points, right? Then it's going to be hard to list all the 3, right? Like A, B, C, and then in addition to that, also talking about like the different contrasting points. So if that's the case, you just want to stick with identifying what's similar and then leaving this later for the body paragraphs and the topic sentences, okay? In order to go with B though, option B, this is the template that will best help you, which is a structure that starts with a contrasting signpost like while or although or even though, right? There's these kind of differences, both do this together or similarly, okay? And so as an example, it says, although the type of destruction and social context are vastly different in each work, that's the first half of it, we're saying the type of destruction, social context, those are the differences. Both authors communicate that good can consequently result from destruction through the growth of the protagonist and the development of their relationship with other characters, okay? You can't just end here, right? If you say both authors communicate that good can consequently result from destruction, that's like a no duh. The prompt already established that. So if you're saying, well, that's one of my similarity point, there's nothing more that you're adding to the prompt. The prompt is asking how, right? And so we're saying this is my point 1, this is my point 2, the 2 similarities. And then the differences, we have destruction, social context, okay? And so that is how your thesis statement is going to look like. And this is an optional sentence that you can write. I don't actually advise that a lot of students do this, but sometimes at school there are teachers who for some reason emphasize that you list out the authorial choices that you are going to be using. And so that last sentence after your main thesis statement, you'll analyze or you'll write down what you'll be analyzing in terms of authorial choices. So you can say this will be explored through the use of symbolism, narrative structure, and character development. But note that this is completely optional, okay? Now, when it comes to the body paragraphs, structuring the body paragraphs, important, right? Because it ensures clarity, a deep analysis, and also a strong comparison between the 2 texts. Paper 2 is all about comparison and contrast, so making sure that you're giving me a good balance between the 2. If we take a closer look at this essay, this is kind of like an example of how much you would write for each section of a paper 2. So the introduction is quite long, and you might be like, wait, this is the length of an introduction that I have to write? If you kind of go back to the previous slides that I just talked about, right, if we compile that all together into one paragraph, it'll probably be a length almost similar to this. Does it always have to be this length? Not necessarily, right? I would say this is like the maximum length that you should tell yourself to write. If you go beyond this, that's a little too much, right? If you write half of what is shown here, like maybe this much, that's also totally fine, okay? In terms of body paragraphs, you definitely want to ensure that the length of your body paragraphs are pretty equal, right? You don't want one paragraph being this long and then the next body paragraph being this short and then going back and forth with this fluctuation. And so make sure you're just maintaining that consistent word count. It doesn't have to be exact, obviously, but still, if you're mentioning like, 3 examples per paragraph, then make sure you stick to that instead of doing 1 for one and then 3 for another. Okay, so the first structure that I'm going to teach you guys is the alternating structure, and this is, I think, the easiest structure to use for the paper too, which is an alternation simply between text A and B into separate paragraphs. So if you look on the very top, there's actually A, B, and then a parentheses, AB. And the reason why I say this is because writing 4 body paragraphs, totally okay? If you're gonna write 6 body paragraphs, yes, that's a stretch, but that doesn't necessarily mean that your body paragraphs are all gonna be that long, right? If you're writing 6 body paragraphs, compared to an essay that has 4 body paragraphs, the length of body paragraphs are gonna be relatively shorter, right? So assuming that we stick with 4 here, right, but also letting you know that it is possible to write a 6 body paragraph essay out of this, alternating structure is suitable when you have multiple examples for each text. So let's say for this one similarity point, I want to talk about like the transformation of the protagonist, right? If I have multiple moments or sections in the novel or the play that support that idea or that actually shows that, then I probably want to go for an alternating structure because you have an entire paragraph to dedicate for one text. So here we have paragraph 1, discuss text A on the first key point. Paragraph 2, you want to discuss text B on the same key point, making direct comparisons. So consider this as one set, right? That's why it's labeled in a same color. Paragraph 3 and 4, again, you're alternating text A and text B, yet in terms of its characteristics, this is supposed to be one set. Okay, so when we're using an alternating structure with 4 body paragraphs, so let's say there's like a cut here, okay, you're ultimately going to be using 2 rows of your CNC chart, okay? So this means this is going to be point 1, right, and this is point 2, right? If you're gonna write 6 body paragraphs, that means you're bringing in 1 more row to talk about. Okay, the next is a paired structure. This is where it gets a little bit different. So now instead of separating text A and B into different body paragraphs, you're going to talk about them together in the same body paragraph. And this is suitable when you have multiple comparison points. So you have a lot of rows that you can bring in, but not necessarily a lot of examples per text. So for an A and B combined paired structure, you want to make sure that you're writing minimum 3 body paragraphs. Okay, you can't write 2 body paragraphs for a paper 2. In any kind of essay for English, make sure you're not writing 2 body paragraphs. Okay, 3 paragraph minimum, and then beyond that, great, right? And so what do? Paragraph 1, you discuss the first key point while integrating both text A and B, right? Pretty simple. Body paragraph 2, you discuss the second point, integrating both text A and B. And body paragraph 3, integrating both text A and B for the third key point, okay? And so if we compare the alternating structure to the paired structure, of course, the paired structure will be longer in length technically, right? But it's not gonna be like double the length. But because like I said, for the paired structure, you can also bring in just like 1 example for each text, or you can just do like 2 examples. Whereas for the alternating structure, right, we want to bring in minimum 2 to 3 to even 4, right? So make sure you're asking yourself, do I have a lot of support for the point that I can bring in? Last but not least, let's say it's half and half, right? For 1 comparison point, so for 1 row in our CC chart, right? Let's say this row, you just have a lot of examples that you can bring in, right? Then use a combined structure, because for a combined structure, you can separate text A and B into different paragraphs for 1 point, okay? But then for the next 2 points, right? These 2 points, maybe you just have like, I don't know, just a couple to bring in, like 1 or 2. Then in that case, for body paragraph 2 and 3 and 4, you can actually just integrate text A and B together, okay? And so one thing that I want to say is there is no structure that will always guarantee a higher score. But it's important that you stick with a structure and that you practice. So the right essay structure, ultimately, you just want to write your body paragraphs that are around 1,000 to 1,300 words. So that means if you're writing 6 body paragraphs, you divide 1,000 by 6, Okay, if you're writing 4 body paragraphs, you divide 1,000 by 4. If you're writing 3, you do the same thing. So ultimately, everyone's writing within an hour and 45 minutes, which means just because you're writing more body paragraphs doesn't mean you have to write way more. Okay. Experimenting in the beginning is really important, especially if you're someone who just got introduced to the paper too. Don't just stick with one. I would probably experiment with the different structures and see what really works for you. And at a point, you might be like, oh, I realize that I'm most confident using this structure. Or whenever I use this structure, I always get good feedback saying there's a good balance. Then that's the structure that you should stick with. If you get a comment saying, I don't think this structure is really working for you, I don't really see where the comparison point is being mentioned, then you might want to utilize a different one, okay? There is one structure that I want you to avoid completely, okay? And that's what we call a block structure. A block structure means looking at the essay as a whole, you're dedicating the first half of the essay just on text A, and then the second half of the essay just on text B. And so you'll basically be giving me different points like, point A on text A, point 2 on text A, right? And then if we're writing like a 6-body paragraph or maybe 4, right, you'll still be talking about text A, and then the rest will be focused on text B, 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 going back to the first point, going back to the second point, going back to the third point. So as you kind of see like this pattern, first of all, it disrupts the flow of comparison. Okay, so meaning by the time you get to your 4th body paragraph, you have to say, oh, by the way, as I mentioned in my 1st body paragraph, I'm going to go back to that point to make a comparison. So it just gets a little bit too like, what? Like all of a sudden you're going back or you're skipping back to 2 paragraphs, right? And this is the most like strong reason as to why I discourage everyone from using this. So even though you're someone who tells yourself like, I'm really good at timing myself writing essays, when you get into this moment of like an exam setting, right, you might actually be like, whoa, this prompt, like this is so easy. This is the prompt that I can really write a lot about. And you might get actually carried away writing so much in the beginning. And you're only on text A still when you only have 30 minutes left, right? That means within the next 30 minutes, you have to get in all of these points in before you hand in your essay. And so inevitably, if you do that and you run out of time, you'll have a bunch that you're mentioning about text A, maybe like 70% of the essay. And then the rest 30% of the essay is on text B. Then even though you may have had good points and good comparison points, you're not gonna get a good score for almost any of the criteria, because criteria A, understanding the text, if you show me an imbalance, it's hard to see whether you've understood this text really well. For criteria B, if you're not giving me a lot of analysis on the 30% part, also a low score. Then C, right, where it's focus and organization, probably also a low score. So that just doesn't work out for you. So regardless of what your school teacher says, regardless of what you learned outside of this class, make sure you're not using the block structure.